So it's the only top five matchup in college football this weekend. It's Notre Dame and Florida State. It's a huge game regardless, but of course we've got to add the other dimension of that guy, and that guy's back in the news. And here to talk about one, Jameis Winston, is Brittnee Taylor Newman of Football.com and Last Word on Sports. Hey, Brittnee.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for joining us and adding some more perspective on the latest from Mr. Heisman Trophy winner from last year, who maybe despite some decent play this year, and I'd like to get some perspective because before we talked a few minutes ago, my thought was, man, this guy was just unstoppable last year, of course, from the opener against Pitt where he almost didn't let the football hit the ground all the way through the game-winning touchdown throw in the BCS championship game. But compare last year to this year and your thoughts about how well Mr. Winston is playing this season.
He's actually playing better when you look at the numbers, which is surprising. You don't hear people talking about that because there's so many of the off-the-field stories. But at this point last year, going into the Clemson game this same weekend last year, which was a huge game for them, he had 1,441 yards. His completion percentage last year was 66.9. At this point, he's at 1,605 yards for the season. He's got a better completion rating of 70%. So he's actually playing better, which is interesting. With all of the off-the-field issues, we would not expect him to be in contention for the Heisman Trophy probably again this year. But it's interesting to see by the numbers and the difference between his play and last year and this year. He's actually stepping it up a little bit.
Yeah, I shouldn't admit that. I'll probably lose some subscribers for the guy that's supposed to be on top of the college football world that I have not looked at Jameis Winston's numbers from this year, just assuming that there was no way that he was duplicating what he did to date last year. Again, I remember the first time I saw him was on a Thursday night against Pitt. It was the opener. He was a freshman playing his first game, national TV. Not a really good football team on the other side, but at the same time, wow, how is he going to be able to respond to all this pressure? And he was almost flawless, and that just continued throughout the season. But even better numbers this year. So that speaks to one thing, I think, Brittnee. Regardless of what you think of the guy, he steps up in the spotlight. He plays well under pressure despite the adversity, and who causes the adversity, he seems to play well. Would like your thoughts on what I consider group mentality, the group think that happens sometimes. We see it involved in news stories, and here's a football story that has become and transitioned into a news story. So what has been your pulse on the reaction of the Florida State community involving Jameis Winston?
It's interesting. I've actually prepped a piece for Football.com on this. Instead of creating an atmosphere that is perhaps divisive, all of the outside voices and the media coverage of the different stories, his off-the-field issues, have actually kind of brought everyone together. Fans very much have a perception that there's a bias with some of the national media outlets, that the only coverage that you're seeing of Jameis is negative, that you're not seeing the same negative coverage for other football players who've had off-the-field issues this season. So they've really rallied behind him. One example of that this week was the trending Blame Jameis hashtag and all of the memes that everyone created where they blamed everything from Ebola to global warming on Jameis Winston, LeBron's receding hairline. I mean, anything they could come up with, they blamed on Jameis. But so the fans have really, really rallied behind him, and the team has as well. They've spoken out this week and kind of talked to reporters about that. It's just causing them to band together behind the scenes, which has kind of been an element that many think has been missing this season with Florida State. That they haven't seemed to be gelled together quite as cohesively as a unit as they were last year. So perhaps this will be the thing that gives them the edge going into the game against Notre Dame. There's a bit of an us against the world mentality in that locker room, and we know a chip on the shoulder of a football team is a dangerous thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if it really ended up kind of playing into this top 5 matchup tomorrow.
Yeah, I think, Brittnee, a dangerous thing, multiply that about 1,000 times when you talk about the talent on the Florida State roster despite what they lost from last year. This is still a team that I don't believe has reached anything close to its potential this year and still is undefeated. Notre Dame usually has the target on its back, being somewhat loved and hated across the country, but it seems to have changed roles in this matchup with Florida State. It would be interesting to see, and I don't know that we're going to see it because I think Jameis Winston's going to play out this year, and Florida State's going to be involved in the college football playoff. But it would be interesting if he was somewhat struggling or there was any chink in the armor on the field. But with 19 consecutive wins, a Heisman Trophy, and playing even better, some football fans, of course, respond and form their opinion based on the play on the field. And Jameis Winston obviously is checking all the boxes right now and has since day one.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see. We'll see. I think this is a must-win game for him. Obviously, they need this win just because of the numbers of the rankings. They're going to need this if they want to vie for a spot in the playoffs. So I think there's a lot riding on this weekend. A lot riding on this weekend, both with the fans and the almighty selection committee.
Yeah, they don't play in the SEC and don't even play in the Pac-12, so it's perceived the schedule's soft despite this matchup with Notre Dame and a few others, Clemson being a pretty good team, that they possibly need to win out depending on what happens elsewhere. Brittnee Taylor Newman of football.com and also Last Word on Sports joins us. Brittnee, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.